My name is Eleanor Fitch, and I am 78 years old. I've spent almost 8 decades on this earth believing that love, real, steadfast love, was built on sacrifice. That if you gave your all to the people you loved, they would hold you up when the storms came. That's what I thought when I raised my son, Graham. I worked overtime shifts at the textile mill to pay for his college tuition. I cashed out my small inheritance from my parents to buy him his first car, a used Honda that still smelled faintly of oil and pine cleaner. When he got engaged, I took out a loan in my own name to help pay for the wedding, just so his new bride could have the day she'd dreamed of. And for years I believed he appreciated it. But that belief shattered one rainy Tuesday afternoon, the day he used the word that burned a hole through my heart. It had been 2 months since my vision began to fail. The doctors said it was macular degeneration, slow but irreversible. I could still see outlines, still recognize shapes, but reading the small print on a bill or pouring a cup of tea without spilling had become difficult. I wasn't helpless. But Graham started treating me like I was. He began stopping by less often, answering my calls with sighs in his voice. I thought maybe he was busy with work. I told myself not to take it personally. Until that afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table, trying to read the utility bill with my magnifying glass, when Graham walked in without knocking. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping off his coat, and didn't even greet me before saying, "We need to talk." I smiled faintly. "All right, dear. What's on your mind?" He didn't sit. He just stared at me for a moment, then said, "This situation. Mom, it's becoming a burden." The word hit me like a physical blow. Burden. "I just mean," he rushed on, "it's getting harder for me to manage everything. You can't live alone anymore. We should look at other arrangements." I set the bill down slowly. "Other arrangements. There's a place," he said, his voice smoothing into that salesman tone he used when he wanted something. "Affordable. They can handle meals, cleaning. All the stuff you can't keep up with anymore." I stared at him, though my fading sight meant I could only see the shadow of his face. "You want to put me in a home?" "It's not like that," he said quickly. "It's for your own good." But I could hear it in his voice, the relief at the thought of handing me off to someone else. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and told him I'd think about it. And that night, lying in my bed with the rain tapping against the window, I made a silent promise. If he thought I was a burden, then he'd have to watch from the outside while I built a life so rich, so full, so untouchable, that he'd wish he'd been the one to stand by me. Because I wasn't going to fade quietly into some affordable facility. I was going to find a place where I could live, not just exist. And when I did, he wouldn't be welcome. If you want to hear how I went from being labeled a burden to stepping through the doors of the most beautiful assisted living community in the county, a place my son couldn't dream of affording, stick with me. Like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel. I used to think there was nothing more powerful than a mother's promise. The night Graham was born, in that tiny county hospital with the chipped tile floors, I swore I would give him a life better than mine. No matter what it took. Back then I was 37, a widow of 2 years, and working 6 days a week at the textile mill. My hands were already calloused from the weaving machines, my lungs gritty from lint dust, but when they placed that swaddled baby in my arms, the weight of him felt like purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something for him. It started with the little things. Saving pennies in a coffee tin on the kitchen counter. Packing my lunch instead of buying it. Mending my own clothes instead of replacing them. Each dollar saved went into a bank account with his name on it, though he wouldn't know about it for years. By the time he was 8, he'd already shown signs of being bright, quicker than most at school, curious about the world. I bought him second-hand encyclopedias from the church rummage sale, and watched him flip through the pages like he was traveling the globe without leaving our living room. When he was 12, I bought him his first bicycle so he could get to the library on his own. The way his eyes lit up when I wheeled it out from behind the shed. I still hold on to that moment. It made every overtime shift worth it. High school brought new challenges. Graham wanted to join the debate team, but the competitions were out of town. Gas money, hotel fees, entry costs, it all added up. So I took on extra night shifts at the mill, coming home just in time to fry him eggs before school. By senior year, he was talking about college, something no one in our family had ever done. His guidance counselor said he had a real shot at a scholarship, but I didn't want to leave it to chance. I took out a small loan, knowing I'd be the one to pay it back, and promised him we'd make it happen. When he got into the University of Kentucky, I cried harder than I had since his father died. I drove him to campus in a used pickup I'd bought cheap, the same one I'd later trade in to get him his first car when he graduated. It wasn't just money I gave him, it was my time, my strength, my years. I was there when he called home, panicked about his rent. I wired him what I could, even if it meant my electricity bill had to wait a week. I was there when he brought his girlfriend home for Christmas, cooking a dinner big enough to feed a small army. And I was there front row at their wedding, a wedding I paid for in full down to the flowers and the photographer, because I wanted him to have the start in life I never did. Back then, I believed those sacrifices bound us together. That when I got old, the love I'd poured into him would flow back to me like a river returning to the sea. But rivers don't always return. Sometimes they dry up. Looking back now, I can see the cracks. The way he'd sigh when I asked for help moving heavy furniture. The way his calls grew shorter. His visits less frequent once he had a family of his own. The first time I noticed something truly cold in him was 5 years ago, when I broke my ankle slipping on ice outside the grocery store. I called him from the hospital, my voice shaky. "Graham, honey, I could use a ride home." There was a pause. "Mom, I'm busy. Can you call someone else?" I ended up paying a taxi driver $40 to help me up my own front steps. It was a small thing maybe, but it planted a seed of doubt in me. One that would grow roots deeper than I ever wanted to admit. And years later, when my eyesight began to fade, that seed would bloom into something ugly. Because that rainy Tuesday wasn't the first time he'd left me standing alone. It was just the first time he put a word to it. The day after Graham called me a burden, I woke up earlier than usual. I sat at the edge of my bed, feeling the familiar grain of the wooden frame beneath my fingers, and I let the silence fill the room. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of decision. I've never been one for yelling or grand declarations. My mother used to say that storms that arrive without thunder can still wash away entire towns. That's what I wanted now. Not a fight, but a tide strong enough to take me somewhere new. The idea came to me in the simplest way. I was pouring myself a cup of coffee, my hand trembling just slightly as I aimed for the mug, when the radio announcer's voice cut through the static. He was talking about a new assisted living community that had opened in the county, the Willows at Briarwood. He described it like something out of a magazine. Private apartments, chef-prepared meals, walking gardens, a library, music nights, even a greenhouse for residents who liked to garden. The words beautiful, safe, vibrant kept coming up. It wasn't the affordable facility Graham had in mind. I knew places like that. Fluorescent lights, bland food, nurses who barely learned your name before their shift ended. But the Willows, that was different. That was dignity. I called them the next morning. A warm-voiced woman named Carol answered, and when I told her about my vision loss, she didn't sound inconvenienced. She sounded understanding. She offered to have someone pick me up for a tour the next day. That night, I didn't tell Graham. I didn't tell anyone. I made a pot of vegetable soup, ate in silence, and sat with my memories. The years of giving, the decades of believing my son would be my safety net. That net was gone now. The next morning, a silver van with the Willows logo pulled up outside. A man named Alex helped me inside. His voice bright but not fake, and 20 minutes later we were there. I could smell the place before I could see it clearly. Freshly baked bread from the kitchen, lavender from the garden. No chemical antiseptic smell. No heaviness in the air. The floors were polished, the light warm. People were laughing. Not in the strained, polite way, but real laughter that reached their eyes. Carol walked me through the apartments. Each one had a kitchenette, wide windows, soft carpet underfoot. In the common area, someone was playing piano. Down the hall, a book club was meeting over tea. I realized then that this wasn't the end, the way Graham framed it. This was a beginning. I told Carol I needed to think about it, but in my heart I already knew. When I got home, I sat at the table with my checkbook and my savings ledger. Years of careful living had left me with enough. Not enough for extravagance, but enough to secure the kind of life where no one could make me feel like a burden again. The next day I put down a deposit. And then I waited. Not because I needed more time to move, but because I wanted Graham to see it for himself. I wanted him to know, without a single raised voice, that I wasn't just surviving in some corner of the world he'd chosen for me. I was going to live beautifully, and he wouldn't have a key to the door. I didn't tell Graham I was moving. Not in a phone call, not in a letter. I simply called him one Thursday morning and said, "I'd like you to come by this Saturday. There's something I want to show you." He hesitated, the way he always does when my voice is firm. "Is this about, the arrangements?" "In a way," I said. "You'll see." Saturday arrived crisp and bright. The van from the Willows came to pick me up first. Carol had arranged everything. I rode in silence, watching the houses and fields blur past, my pulse steady. When we pulled into the stone-paved drive of the Willows, sunlight spilled across the gardens, and the glass front doors gleamed like a welcome I'd been waiting my whole life to walk through. I met Graham in the lobby. He'd driven over in his SUV, wearing that look. Half curiosity, half the kind of impatience people save for tasks they don't want to do. "This isn't the place I told you about," he said, glancing around at the polished floors and the chandelier overhead. "No," I agreed. "It's the place I chose." Before he could speak, Carol appeared. "Mr. Fitch, we've been expecting you. Let me give you the tour your mother had last week." We walked together through the wide halls, past residents chatting over coffee, past a sunlit reading room where a woman in her 80s was helping a younger volunteer arrange books. Outside, the greenhouse shimmered in the light, filled with green shoots and hanging baskets of flowers. "This is nice," Graham said finally, but his tone wasn't admiration, it was calculation. He was trying to work out the cost. "It is nice," I replied, my voice calm. "And it's mine now." We ended the tour in my apartment, a one-bedroom with a little kitchenette, a floral quilt on the bed, and a view of the gardens from the window. My rocking chair was already there, placed where the light fell best. Graham stood in the doorway. "How are you paying for this?" "Don't worry about that," I said, setting a vase of fresh tulips on the counter. "What matters is that I'm here. And you can visit if you call ahead." He laughed, but it was hollow. "You know I couldn't get into a place like this even if I wanted to, right? This is expensive." I met his eyes, or at least the blur of where his eyes should be. "I know." For a moment neither of us spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between us. I could almost see the thoughts moving behind his face, the slow realization that he no longer had control over where or how I lived. "I have to go," he said abruptly. "I'll talk to you later." "Take care, Graham," I said softly, turning back to arrange my tulips. When the door clicked shut behind him, I didn't feel triumphant. Felt free. Because the truth wasn't about him at all. It was about me, standing in my own space, in a life I'd chosen, without needing anyone's permission to be there. The first few weeks at the Willows felt like stepping into another life, one I didn't know I'd been waiting for. I started my mornings in the garden, walking the gravel paths while the roses opened in the sun. Carol introduced me to Ruth, a retired librarian who shared my love of history, and we began meeting twice a week in the reading room to pore over old newspapers. Afternoons, I'd join a group in the greenhouse, the warm scent of soil and lavender filling the air as we planted seedlings. Nobody here called me a burden. Nobody here sighed when I asked for help. And the staff never made me feel less because my eyes couldn't do what they used to. One Saturday in early spring, the Willows hosted a garden party for residents and their guests. I didn't invite Graham. I didn't need to. I knew word would get back to him. It always did. Sure enough, a week later I saw him. Not inside. Not sitting beside me. Outside the tall iron fence that wrapped around the property. I was sitting on the terrace with Ruth, sipping iced tea, when I caught the faint outline of his SUV parked just across the street. Even with my vision the way it was, I could make out the shape of him in the driver's seat. He didn't wave. He didn't come to the gate. He just sat there. I knew what he was seeing. The wide lawns, the glass conservatory, the residents laughing under striped umbrellas. And me, sitting in my floral dress, the sunlight warming my face. I wondered if he was doing the math, realizing the life he had imagined for me, the one where I'd fade away in a place he could control, was gone. Maybe he was remembering the word he'd used. Burden. I didn't feel the need to walk over or call out. Some truths don't need to be spoken aloud. Some are sharp enough in silence. I took another sip of tea, turned to Ruth, and asked her to tell me again about the summer she'd traveled to Paris. When I looked back toward the road a few minutes later, the SUV was gone. That night, as I sat in my apartment with the window open, I heard the faint notes of someone playing piano down the hall. I thought of Graham, not with bitterness but with clarity. I had spent a lifetime giving him everything I could. And when the time came, he showed me what I meant to him. That chapter was over now. The deed to this life, the one I chose for myself, was written in my own hand. And he'd have to watch from afar. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been told you were a burden and proved otherwise, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more stories that show the power of living life on your own terms.